I'm wondering if the pendulum has swung so that it became recently much more difficult to actually rationalize staying and working on something when all you see around you is transition.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. There is an Econo Lodge on the Iowa side of the Iowa-Nebraska border. And inside the Econo Lodge, just inside the entrance, there is a place where you can physically feel your life force begin to drain. And that spreads out throughout the entire building, or at least what I saw. The structure was exactly what you would expect an Econo Lodge to be, meaning that if it were somehow needed and repurposed, it could, without much refurbishment, become a minimum security prison. It was gray, it was pet-friendly, and oddly for a pet-friendly structure, it had no grass, just pebbles, and trees growing out, but just pebbles outside. There was an attendant at the desk who was just, as I described on my Facebook page, eternal and tired.
Yeah, I've seen that look.
I'm
sort of feeling that look today, but go ahead.
We had called ahead because we knew where we were going to wind up after the day of driving, and we needed a pet-friendly place. So we had already paid, but he had to check us in. And he was staring at his monitor, and he was typing occasionally, but really clicking the mouse just at regular intervals. And it took so long, and we were the only people there, that I asked him twice whether something was wrong. And on each occasion, he looked up from his computer and replied with the inclusive times of their continental breakfast. He had what That's David weird. And video game people would call NPC energy.
What is that?
NPC is a non-player character, meaning that they're scripted.
Right.
There are certain cues, but they may or may not have anything to do with the situation that's going on around them.
Right.
And I realized that the entire staff that I saw had NPC energy. They weren't registering what was going on. They would barely look up. I won't get into a description of the room itself, except to say I found it fitting that the smoke detector had been removed from the ceiling, and David found it in the drawer next to the Bible. Wow. And I thought there was a poetry in that, actually.
Yeah, probably. And there's definitely some poetry there. And I will say, we may want to post that picture of that room in the Facebook group, because that room had a lot to talk about. It had a lot to talk about. I was like, the weird purple postmodern chairs with the strangely antique cream ornate dresser. I was like, wow, it either reflects some very interesting choices or no choices. Well, we found a dresser, stick it in a room. I found some chairs, stick them in a room.
I think it reflects, the room had the decorating character of early Goodwill parking lot.
At best. I would say maybe. College student, but my college dorm room was put together with more thought of cobbled together Goodwill pieces at that. But it's and the lamp that has no room to be a lamp. It's a piece of work. So anyway,
and maybe not early Goodwill parking lot, maybe just free cycle.
Hey, don't knock free cycle. I've gotten some good stuff.
But you haven't outfitted a motel or a hotel. So
fair point.
Anyway, I posted those on Facebook, and it was one of those things I said on Facebook, the more you look at this picture, the more things that are wrong.
Oh yeah.
And so it was fascinating that. And so I started to think about how, whether it's organizations or policies or initiatives or just people have that kind of life force sucking NPC energy, how you can feel it, how it's so apparent to anybody walking in, and whether, and this was what I was kind of ruminating on, whether it would be just an exhaustive effort to fix it, or if you just did one thing that runs counter to that narrative, it would set a much more positive tone. But it's kind of like a rut, how to get out of it and how to escape from that kind of feeling when you have it.
Yeah. So when you say one thing counter, you mean like as an employee, like dig yourself out of that energetic pit and like make eye contact, answer one question, or something else happening?
Yeah, no, one thing, whether it's just a really interesting mural where no original artwork should be, or, I had a partner in one of the early law firms that I formed. It was in the late 90s. And there was something going on, but everybody was really low energy. And he was a big, gregarious guy. And he started coming in, and he would come in kind of at 10 o'clock. So everybody was pretty much there. And it was the same thing, that whole routine. Hey, how you doing? Fine. How are you? Good. Can't complain. You just have that whatever. Mm-hmm. But I remember when he came in and they're like, hey, Chuck, how you doing? And he went super duper. And everybody just kind of looked up, and it was this weird thing. And that's
Did anyone slap him
No, because he's a big guy. And
okay.
He's one of these people who was, a Raven fan before there were Ravens fans. He's just very outsized character. But then he started coming in every day. It was like super. And it made everybody smile. And you could see that it actually had a weird effect. All he did was he just broke the script.
Well, see, I think that's the interesting thing, though, is like, because before you got to that part, before you mentioned that guy, Chuck, was that his name? Before we got to Chuck, what I was thinking was like for that to happen, you're talking about an NPC character noticing, like having the what is it, not non-player character, like actually being a cognizant player. They have to notice that is what's happening. Like for someone to put up a mural, they have to notice and care that like there has to be an awareness and a interest and a give a hoot about that being the vibe to want to change it. And I think that's important to not overlook, because I think it's part of the problem is that, it's not unlike an individual being in a depressive state. I think you can have like an organizational depressive state where you just don't even notice the cups piling up on the table, or, whatever it is, where it's just, it doesn't rise to the occasion, or not that it doesn't rise to the occasion, but you just don't have it in you to notice those things. And I think that those environments like you're talking about, clearly no one's trying to create a particular experience for the guest in the hotel room.
Oh, they created an experience.
Okay, fair point. Fair point. I don't think it was a curated experience. Right. Yes, I think it was true. Good luck, don't complain, because we gave you a refrigerator, didn't we? Damn it!
Right. It was like you knew what you were getting into when you dialed Econo Lodge.
Right. Exactly. It's just like I dare you to suggest we didn't meet expectations.
As they did.
Because you decided to come here, so you are responsible for those expectations. But to your point, it is entirely possible for someone who, so I think the likelihood that someone who is existing in that environment suddenly is like, I'm going to spice things up is probably skipping the whole step of someone noticing or caring or just having the energy for it or whatever. And sometimes it's the place itself that beats the energy out of people. I've talked to people, fortunately these are clients of mine. But I've talked to people who work in places where there's like an active force to dull out any action or interest you take in making things better. And it's like the learned helplessness thing, where it's just like, nobody cares, nothing ever changes, so why bother kind of vibe. But you're absolutely right. Someone can come in, and it doesn't always, and I think that's the important thing. It doesn't always take a lot. It doesn't always take something heroic, or it doesn't take renovating all the rooms. Like sometimes it can just be energy is contagious, and the energy that you bring into a space can spread. Now, I will say it can be a little annoying if someone's a little bit like, super doopity duper. I kind of want to slap that person, at least today when I'm not feeling well. But
even a slap is breaking the script and showing more energy than previous. But there's a reaction.
Yes, absolutely.
and not only a reaction, but possibly something that sparks, well, why the hell is he doing that? Or why, it might spark a little bit of insight. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention the movie Free Guy. Have you ever heard of that? Mm-mm. It's a new movie, well, relatively new. Ryan Reynolds. Mm-hmm. And the whole theme is that he is a non-player character in this video game called Free City. And so he's just a guy who works at a bank. And so they have missions like bank heist. And he's just one of the non-player characters that they tell to get down on the floor, and he gets down on the floor. And he goes through a script of ordering the same coffee every day. And when a customer leaves, he's like, don't have a good day, have a great day. But that's just his script, right. And so the story of the movie is that he gradually becomes conscious, and he decides that he wants something, and he walks into the coffee shop, and instead of ordering his coffee with 2 creams and sugar, he orders a cappuccino, and everybody in the coffee shop turns around. Like, what? We all get this. And it's that kind of change, so and the question is, I think it's kind of a race. If you had somebody at the desk who came in with a real customer experience, customer-centric attitude, there's a race between whether that person's energy makes positive changes or that person's energy gets beaten out of them. Who wins, the person or the place?
All right. So now I would be remiss if I didn't bring up not one, but 2 different things. One is, I don't know if you've ever watched What We Do in the Shadows. Mm-mm. No. So there's a movie.
It's a vampire thing, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's wonderfully hysterical. It's very I don't know, parody is not the right word. Maybe it is, whatever. But the TV show is also great. And one of the vampires that lives in the house is an energy vampire, not like a regular vampire. And that whole thing, Colin Robinson is hysterical. And his whole thing is he like tells these long, boring stories, and he drains people's energy. And he'll come in and be like, hey, one day he goes, some days he was working in this office. He just throws out these like random platitudes kind of thing, like if you're not living, you're dying, or, like, I don't know. I can't remember what they were. It is brilliant. And then he meets his match this one day. That's this emotional vampire at work, and she's draining him. And it's a brilliant thread in the whole vampire trope. And it's really well done. And there's a couple episodes that focus on him, but I highly recommend that show. It is very funny because they're vampires, but they live on Staten Island. And it's just very, very funny. So
one thing they'll tell you, the Family Guy equivalent of an energy vampire is Buzz Killington.
Oh, okay.
Who goes into a party and says, now that I've got you, let me tell you a story about a bridge. And everybody's like,
yeah, exactly. And so it's a wonderful theme and part of what I love about it is it does surface all these ways that like he'll tell these, not about a bridge, but these like long stories, and you're like, oh, and how it does just suck the energy out of a space. And it is kind of a race, like who is bringing the energy to the space. But I want to go back, to the movie you mentioned, because there is that kind of like waking up and realizing you have choices kind of energy. And that like any one of those employees at the O'Connell Lodge could, in theory, and let's skip over all of the, I don't want to skip over. I want to just sort of mention that because it feels yucky to not that, I don't want to overlook the fact that those people's lives who work in that place are probably very complicated and stressful. There's probably a lot going on. So I don't want to make it sound like just be happy. Right. They may be living on the edge of very tricky situations or whatnot. So skipping over all that, a friend of mine just recently gave me a book called The Midnight Library. I think that's what it's called. Something close to that anyway. And it's all about this sort of limbo space between life and death, where you are put into this library where there are these infinite books where any of your tiny or big choices could have led, other lives, could have and tiny little things or really big things. Like I didn't quit swimming. And so I became an Olympic athlete.
So the books tell the story of what could have been?
Yes. From that moment forward. So they're not about the past. They don't go into any detail, but like if you pick that book open and walk into and start reading the first page, you're suddenly in that life, but you're still you and you're really seeing like what changed and what didn't. And it all stems from the first book that the sort of caretaker there gives you, Mrs. Elm, is this book of regrets that you have. And as she lives a couple of these lives, some of them dissolve because she realizes like, oh, that wouldn't have been so great. Like, or, if I had stayed in that band or whatever it was, like that had other consequences. And so I'm not going to regret that because then I missed this thing. And so it is, as my friend, my dear friend said, there is stealth wisdom in the book, like a lot of stealth wisdom. I almost maybe kind of want to read it again. I just finished it. But it is a really interesting take on just noticing how much, I don't even want to say power, but how many choices you do have in these tiny little ways. It's not just about the big, like one of the things she says is you're picking books off the middle, the really obvious things like, well, if I'd gotten married or if I'd to that guy, or if I had not quit swimming for the Olympics. She said, you need to pick books off the top shelf or the bottom shelf. The little tiny things that just didn't seem to like these like tiny, smaller choices about, I mean, this obviously wasn't in the book, but things like, did I look up and talk to the guy I was checking in at the Econo Lodge, those tiny little things, and then how those make a difference. It's just really, really interesting. And it has me thinking about that concept a lot.
And, one of the things is, as you were talking that I was thinking about is, I'm wondering if there is even less of an inclination now to make those small changes in when you look at it from the perspective of the Great Resignation, right? So many people are leaving their jobs that I'm wondering if it becomes so commonplace just to leave when something's not right. If you do give up that opportunity to make the place where you are right, if it's so easy to change, to leave, then it gets, I think, a little bit harder to rationalize staying and trying to make it better. I
think that's a careful pendulum seesaw of a thing, because I don't disagree with the statement, but I also think it's based on the assumption that leaving is easier than staying and working on it. And I think sometimes at least some huge portion of the Great Resignation, and it's not just leaving jobs, like people are across the board or, moving to different states and because they, for all sorts of reasons, leaving, relationships and getting dogs and tattoos, following the hobbies and whatnot. I think sometimes those things are happening because it has been easier to stay and work on it than to end a thing. I think you have to step back and take a look at, it's not like leaving a thing is always easier than staying, and staying is not always, it could be either one.
No, and I'm not vilifying by any stretch the Great Resignation, because I think there are many, many choices being made now that should have been made sooner or that are really work out well for everybody concerned. But what I'm saying is, if you go back to, I'm sure it wasn't this simple, but if you go back to what I think of as the 50s, where the goal was get a job, stay there 25 years, get your gold watch, get your pension and all that stuff, where leaving a thing was more against norm. It could be even scandalous if the thing you're leaving is a marriage and, oh my gosh, she's divorced, or oh my gosh, he's divorced. So staying was really the virtue. Somebody who stuck it out, that was a company man. That sort of thing. Whereas if you take an overly simplistic view of the Great Resignation and you think, well, it's everybody's leaving. Everybody leaves. If I'm dissatisfied with one small thing, it's easy to leave because there's no shame in that. There's no problem with that. And there is no shame in it. But I'm wondering if the pendulum has swung so that it became recently much more difficult to actually rationalize staying and working on something when all you see around you is transition.
I think it's an interesting question, and I will continue. I won't sit here and think about it right now because I'd make for a very boring next segment of the podcast.
You want like 10 minutes of silence?
Yeah, I just want to ruminate on that for a second, because I don't want to jump. I mean, I'm going to jump to disagreeing because that's what's coming up in my mind right now, but I will continue to think on it because, but I think.
Can't just flash forward to 2 hours from now when you say, Elliot, you were right. Is that, can't we
Does
just
that
do that?
happen? I'm sorry, I don't think that doesn't really happen. Yeah. No, not true.
I'm an optimist.
No, not true. Not true. I always continue to think about things I disagree with, and I usually end up taking pieces of them and working them in to my thoughts. But no, I don't. I have no doubt that there are plenty of people who jump instead of working on things because I've heard those stories where. Or, I've seen those things play out where someone leaves for a different job and it's a thing that actually their current place would have been more than happy to do for them. I mean, you see that a lot in counter offers where somebody's like, oh, you wanted 3, the only thing that job has is 3 more days of vacation. We can work that out. And that's, that's a slippery slope where then it sort of feels like, well, if you'd have given me that, why didn't you give me that before? But anyway, so that can be kind of complicated. But I don't, at least from the huge number of people I've spoken to who are making changes and moving, they're all sort of, what's the word I want? Not latent, but kind of built up needs and wants, itches that aren't getting scratched, or, things that were easy to like tolerations that they are no longer as willing to tolerate and have just kind of built up to a point, like one person who left a friend of mine's firm was just like, we are so tired of parenting without having family around, and all of our family is in whatever state they were in. And so they're just done with that. And the company can't, I think that's the reason maybe I'm disagreeing. I just thought of it. A lot of the stories I'm hearing about people leaving and moving and whatnot are things that actually aren't even company related. It's not like you're not paying me enough, or we don't have a good enough benefits, or I'm climbing a ladder to a better title. It's more substantive things that have nothing to do with the country. The company, not the country. Have nothing to do with the company and more about the person and what they need. I guess it's the organizational version of like, it's not you, it's me.
And what I find interesting is that I think that your disagreement arises from what you do and who you talk to every day, because you talk to a lot of people who are, and you work with them in going through the mental and emotional exercises of processing that they need to leave, do whatever. I work with employers who are like, you need to remind her of her restrictive covenants and non-compete obligations. So it's a different perspective. What we do every day brings a different perspective. It's not just that I don't disagree that there are personal reasons. I can't disagree. It's, of course, it's self-evident. There are personal reasons. I know you deal with that every day with your clients. The only point I'm raising is whether there is, and there's a good and a bad with this, there is more of an inclination just to walk.
I don't disagree with that. I do think I think this ties into a lot of social issues that also come up. So I'm not saying that very well, but there's something a friend of mine, is kind of a mentor of mine, said to me one time about a particularly tricky social issue. And I don't even want to name it because then it'll be about that. But she was saying to me that anytime, and I've just seen this apply to so many things since then. So, and I think it applies to this too, that anytime there's like a shift in the culture around any particular issue, that in order for that to happen, it has to kind of overswing first. And you have to give it space to overswing and it be this like, oh, now everybody's saying that they have that issue or whatever. And it can feel like this reason to dismiss it or poo-poo it or somehow delegitimize a particular person's perspective on that thing. And I think it's really interesting to take this perspective of, so much in the same way, like as teenagers are trying to feel out their own independence and autonomy and selfness, they will overswing on they're overly like, oh, you can't tell me what to do because they don't yet have that. It's like expecting nuance out of a thing when it's just trying to turn the tide, like you overswing. And it probably does seem a little extra easy. Well, like Bob and Sally and Joe quit, so I'm just going to quit. And like maybe it opens that door more widely so that it's easier to walk through. But I don't think you're saying this either, but I think that's where we're kind of hitting here is I don't think people who had no interest in walking through the door are just suddenly walking through the door because they don't like the coffee selection at work. I think it only beckons to you if you were already kind of staring the door down and you're like, well, now it's open. I could wander through and see. And that was one of the themes in that book was you can only learn by living was one of the things. Like you can't sort of figure it out in advance and then try it. So if someone's sort of staring at that door, like what if, the only way you can figure out if that's the right door is to go through it and try the thing, which leads you to potential regrets, of course. But that was the whole.
Well, I went through the door of Econo Lodge and found actual regret. So there is that.
There is that. And you know what? I actually just want to say, because I do think it's funny. There was a tiny part of me who almost canceled our recording today, although and probably the only reason I didn't was because scheduling is tricky this week for both of us, because I'm not feeling well and I have a fever and I'm kind of like weepy and like I just don't feel good. And I came on this call thinking like I'm going to be the worst like co-host today because my energy was like I could probably get a job like that at your Econo Lodge today. They'd be like, "You're a perfect fit.
You
perfect fit.
You get us."
that deadness in your eyes, that lack of interest in anything, you could be next month's employee of the month. And I will say, your energy has actually shifted my energy a little bit. And so, to the point of your whole story and what we're talking about here, I do think that is absolutely true. The energy you bring into a space can affect other people, but you can also be affected by it if you allow it.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.